Wife cheated after 6 months of marriage, chapter pun beginnings. I clearly remember the first day I saw Isabelle. Though back then, she was just a captivating stranger in a busy café. I had no idea she'd become the greatest love and heartbreak of my life. But let me start from the beginning to give you a sense of the road that led me to where I stand now. I was 34 at the time, in a transitional phase of my career. After nearly a decade as a software consultant, I decided to accept a leadership training program at my company. An offer that both excited and terrified me. My boss had seen potential in me, but I struggled with insecurities about leading teams, especially when I was used to working solo or in small groups. Despite my nerves, I knew I wanted more from my professional life. So, on a crisp spring morning, I tried my best to shake off the jitters and headed to the corner café near the office for a caffeine jolt. The place was packed. My eyes scanned the crowd for an empty table, but all were occupied. That's when I spotted her warm brown skin, dark, wavy hair pinned back in a loose bun, flipping through a paperback while sipping an espresso. There was an empty seat at her table, and something about her posture, casual, self-assured, drew me in. "Excuse me," I said, balancing my laptop bag on my shoulder. "Do you mind if I share your table? It's a zoo in here." She glanced up. Her eyes were a deep brown, and they lingered on me for just a moment before she smiled and nodded. "Sure, have a seat." I thanked her, settled in, and tried to focus on the swirling foam in my lat. But my gaze kept drifting to her novel, some literary fiction with a bright red cover. Eventually, I mustered the nerve to ask her about it. That opened a conversation that flowed effortlessly, meandering from favorite authors to local hikes. We exchanged names, Isabelle and Even. By the time I glanced at my watch, I realized I was almost late for the start of my leadership training day. We parted with a warm, "Nice chatting with you." But something in me wanted to see her again. I didn't even know if she worked nearby or was just passing through. Yet I felt a rush of hopefulness. I hurried out, promising myself I'd return the next morning. Maybe I'd get lucky. To my surprise, she was there again the next day, flipping through a different paperback. We shared a table, and soon a routine formed. I'd arrive around 7:45 a.m. And if Isabelle was there, we'd chat for 10-15 minutes. Over the course of a few weeks, I learned she worked in project management at a tech firm just around the block. She was a few months older than me, had been married once before. Something she mentioned or fanned, though I didn't pry. We discovered we both loved to travel and had a shared obsession with stand-up comedy. One morning, emboldened by our easy report, I asked if she might want to grab dinner sometime. Her smile was radiant, and she agreed. It wasn't a typical romantic restaurant scenario. We ended up at a bustling place near her office, squeezed into a tiny table with a flickering tearlight candle. She ordered spicy curry, and I teased her about how red her face got from the heat. She teased me back for tearing up over the chili peppers. We laughed so much the server cast us amused looks. That dinner was the start of something unexpected and beautiful. I was drawn to her confidence, her bright intelligence, and the way she made me feel seen. She told me about her childhood in a small coastal town, her passion for volunteering at women's shelters, her ambition to rise in management. I shared my insecurities about the new leadership role, how I felt like a fraud who might stumble at any moment. Isabelle had a way of listening that made you feel not just heard, but genuinely understood. Within a couple of months, we were spending nearly every weekend together. Going on hikes, trying new restaurants, attending stand-up comedy shows. We'd drive up the coast to watch the sunset or spontaneously rent a cabin in the mountains for a weekend getaway. Our friends would tease us about being inseparable, and it was true. We fell in love fast, and I felt an intense certainty about Isabelle that I'd never felt with anyone else. She'd been transparent from early on about her past. A brief, tumultuous marriage in her late 20s that ended due to irreconcilable differences. "We was my college sweetheart," she explained with a shrug, but we grew apart. She didn't speak about her ex-husband often, and I never pressed. My impression was that she'd moved on completely, so it wasn't something that cast a shadow over us at all. As for me, I had been in a few long-term relationships, but never married. My parents often nudged me about settling down, having kids. They wanted me to find happiness. When I introduced them to Isabelle at a family gathering, they adored her right away. My mother in particular was enamored with Isabelle's poise and career drive. Isabelle seemed to fit seamlessly into my life, my circle of friends, and my family. In the quiet corners of my mind, I was already imagining a future with her, a shared home, maybe a child or two, travelling the world side by side. 2 years of dating flew by. We built a shared bank of memories. Photos from vacations, inside jokes, her name popping up regularly in my phone's notifications. I found myself daydreaming about proposing. I knew how I wanted to do it, a simple but heartfelt gesture, maybe at sunrise on one of our favourite hikes. The more I thought about it, the more certain I became. And so, one chilly morning in autumn, we woke before dawn and drove to a trailhead by a lake. The sky was still dark when we started our climb. I carried a small ring in my pocket, heart hammering. At the summit, as the first rays of sunlight broke over the water, I knelt on one knee and asked her to marry me. She gasped, tears in her eyes, and said yes. Just like that, I felt my world expand with the promise of forever. We married a few months later in a small, intimate ceremony at a botanical garden. The air was thick with the scent of roses. Our closest friends and family stood under a canopy of blooming vines, cheering as we exchanged vows. We honeymooned in Santorini, gazing at the Aegean Sea from whitewashed terraces, soaking in that newlywed glow. I was 37 by then, she 33. Life felt like a steady breeze at our backs, pushing us toward shared dreams. I never imagined that only 6 months later, everything would start to unravel. Chapter 2 to Shifting Sands. Marriage often changes the landscape of a relationship. There's an intimacy and security in sharing a last name, a home, and a life plan. But there can be hidden pressures too, ones that creep in unexpectedly. For us, the first sign of trouble came with our changing professional lives. Shortly before the wedding, Isabelle had been promoted at her firm, doubling her salary overnight. She became a senior project manager overseeing huge international accounts. She travelled frequently, enjoyed accolades at work, and glowed with newfound confidence. Meanwhile, I found myself stepping into a leadership position that I had pursued, but wasn't entirely ready for. It felt like I was playing catch-up, trying to project authority I didn't yet believe I had. Once we returned from the honeymoon, Isabelle plunged into her new role with gusto. Late meetings, business trips, sometimes entire weekends spent catching up on data reports. I was proud of her. I adored seeing her thrive. But insecurity began to gnaw at me. She was making twice my salary, and from the outside, it seemed like her success soared while I floundered in my own doubts. My new position demanded I lead a team of 20 developers. I quickly realized I lacked certain managerial skills, and the stress took a toll. I'd come home exhausted, snapping at Isabelle over trivial things or withdrawing altogether. She tried to be supportive, but I sensed a growing tension. She was on an upward trajectory, while I was stuck in a loop of self-criticism, afraid of being exposed as incompetent. 6 months into the marriage, the cracks in our dynamic were evident. Our previously effervescent weekends became subdued. We'd drift into separate corners of the house. She in the study, me in the living room, both of us buried in work or our own thoughts. The romantic spontaneity that once marked our relationship faded. We'd bicker about mundane things, whose turn it was to buy groceries, how to arrange the furniture. Me complaining about her late nights, her criticizing my reluctance to go out and socialize. One evening, she came home from a business trip, tossed her suitcase aside, and said, "We need to talk." I braced myself. Something in her tone was different, colder, distant. "Sure," I said, forcing a smile. "How was the trip?" She shrugged, sat on the couch, and patted the cushion for me to join her. "Listen, even," she began, eyes downcast, "I've been thinking a lot about us, about the spark, or lack thereof, between us lately." My stomach dropped. I'd felt it too, that creeping sense of disconnection, but hearing her say it out loud stung. "Yeah," I muttered. "Things have been tense. Maybe it's just the adjustment." "I don't know," she interrupted. "I'm frustrated. You seem insecure, and I don't know how to help. I feel like I'm carrying us forward." "And you?" I bristled, cutting her off. "What do you mean? Carrying us forward? I'm doing my best to adjust to my role. It's not like I'm not trying." She exhaled, rubbing her temples. "That's exactly it. You're so defensive. I can't even talk about these issues without you taking it personally." I felt my throat tighten. It was personal. My leadership insecurities, our financial imbalance, her success overshadowing me, but I swallowed my pride and tried to calm the conversation. "I'm sorry, I do feel uncertain about my job. But I'm working on it. Maybe we need a vacation together, something to recharge." She sighed. "We just got back from a honeymoon not long ago, Ivan, and we're both buried in work. Look, we need a better way to handle stress as a couple." It struck me that she said we, but there was an edge in her voice that felt more like blame than a plan to fix things. I nodded weakly. We let the matter drop, but the tension remained in the air, unsolved. Chapter 3, the ex reappears. The conversation about our fading spark lingered in my mind for days. I attempted small gestures to rekindle our bond. Cooking her favorite meal, surprising her with a new pair of headphones she'd mentioned wanting, leaving little notes in her suitcase when she traveled. She seemed appreciative but still distant, as though her heart was preoccupied with some unspoken concern. Then, one Saturday evening, we planned to attend a concert with some friends. It was a popular rock band from our college days, and we expected a lively, nostalgic night. I was excited. Maybe this would be a stress release, a chance to remember what it felt like to have fun together. As the crowd swelled around us, the band taking the stage in a cacophony of guitar riffs, Isabelle's face lit up. For a few moments, I saw glimpses of the carefree woman I'd fallen for. She laughed with our friends, jumped along with the music, even grabbed my hand for a dance. My spirits lifted, and I thought maybe we were turning a corner. At one point, I left to grab drinks. When I returned, I found her talking to someone at the edge of the crowd, her expression oddly intense. It was a tall man with a chiseled jaw, wearing a leather jacket. I wove through the crowd, balancing plastic cups of beer, and by the time I reached her, the man had disappeared. Isabelle's face registered a brief flicker of alarm before she forced a smile. "Everything okay?" I asked, handing her a cup. She nodded quickly, took a big gulp. "Yeah, just ran into someone I used to know." I didn't think much of it. maybe an old college acquaintance, but as the show went on, I caught her scanning the crowd more than once, a worried crease in her brow. When we got home, she was unusually quiet and retreated to the bedroom quickly, claiming exhaustion. The next few days, she was glued to her phone more than usual, sending rapid texts with an intensity that made me curious. I asked if something was wrong, and she dismissed my concern, saying it was just work, but a part of me suspected there was more to it. She was preoccupied, distant, and I noticed her phone was always closed, her expression guarded whenever it buzzed with a new notification. One late night, I was half asleep when she came to bed, phone in hand. I mumbled something about her being up late, and she replied vaguely, "Just some project deadlines." Then she turned her back to me and curled up. For an instant, I felt a pang of loneliness. We were in the same bed but felt worlds apart. A week after the concert, we got into a trivial argument. Something about her cancelled dinner plan with me. She became flustered, accused me of not respecting her schedule. In the heat of the moment, she declared she needed space. I didn't even know how to respond. She insisted I leave, told me to stay with a friend. My gut churned, but I packed a small bag and complied. Perhaps we needed a breather. If space would help, I was willing to give it a try. I ended up crashing on my old friend Kyle's couch. He lived alone in a tidy apartment, was single, and had plenty of space. He raised an eyebrow at the reason for my visit, but offered no judgment. Just a place to sleep and a willing ear. Those 2 weeks were excruciating. I texted Isabelle daily, tried to call a few times, but her responses were curt. "Need more time?" she'd say. "I'll let you know when we can talk." Kyle suggested I occupy myself, so I threw myself into work, extended hours at the office, anything to distract me from the gnawing anxiety that my marriage might be crumbling. I had no idea that during my absence, she had reconnected with her ex-husband. His name was Martin. They'd seen each other at that concert. He was the someone she used to know. Apparently, they exchanged numbers, and curiosity morphed into more. She confided in him about her marital frustrations, and he played the role of sympathetic ex. Over those 2 weeks, they met up multiple times. Eventually, they slept together. I learned none of this in real time, of course. Isabelle acted normal, if a bit colder, when I finally returned. She let me move back into our place, but gave no sign of regret for pushing me away. At that point, I sensed a shift in her posture. She was distant, and her eyes no longer lit up at my presence. In bed, she turned away from me. I attributed it to ongoing tension, never suspecting the deeper betrayal. Gradually, I felt something was off, like the puzzle of our relationship had new pieces that didn't fit. I would come home, find her dressing up to go out with girlfriends, or get vague answers about her day. When I tried to arrange date nights, she'd be disinterested or mention last-minute plans. My attempts to reignite romance seemed to fall flat. One night, an argument burst open. Fed up with her constant evasiveness, I confronted her about the distance between us. She shot back at me with words that left me reeling. "I'm mentally checked out. I'm not even attracted to you anymore," she said, eyes cold. "I want kids someday, but not with you." That last sentence felt like a knife to the gut. I remember standing in the hallway, my ears ringing, every part of me trembling with shock and hurt. How did we go from the heights of love to such cruelty? My voice shook. "What are you talking about? This is so out of left field. We wanted a family eventually. Why are you saying these things?" She glared, tears in her eyes. "Because you've become complacent. You don't contribute anything to me. I'm always giving, and you're just stuck in your own insecurities." I stammered, trying to keep my composure. Isabelle, you know I've been going through a tough time adjusting at work. But I love you, and I want to fix things, or—" She scoffed. Love? Then why do I feel so alone? Why do I feel like I made a mistake marrying you? Her words pummeled me. I wanted to shout back, to defend myself, but I felt paralyzed. She stormed out of the room, leaving me with a shattered sense of worth. That night, I barely slept. The next morning, we coexisted in icy silence until I left for work. I didn't realize how quickly this conflict would escalate, and that it had already escalated in her heart to a place I wasn't even aware of. Chapter 4: Discovery and Confession. A few days passed. I tried to plan a date night, to coax out any spark we had left. She declined, saying she was meeting friends for a birthday dinner. I asked to join, and she looked almost offended, repeating she needed her own social space. I relented, not wanting another fight. Meanwhile, I was a cauldron of anxieties. Was I losing my wife? One night, I returned from an after-hours event at my office. The house was dark. Isabelle wasn't home yet. I walked into the kitchen, noticing a half-finished glass of wine and a pair of her heels by the door. My phone buzzed a text from her, saying she'd be home late. Something about stopping by a friend's place. My gut told me something was off. I glanced around, seeing her phone watch on the kitchen counter. She'd been wearing it earlier. Why would she leave it here? Something compelled me to pick it up. We rarely invaded each other's privacy, but desperation gnawed at me. Some primal need to know the truth. The watch lit up, showing recent messages. My heart pounded as I scrolled. That's when I saw Martin's name. The text threads told a damning story, talk of meeting up, references to an ongoing sexual relationship, even jokes about the last time they'd had sex. My throat went dry. I blinked, rereading in disbelief. She's cheating on me. I realized with a stomach-churning lurch that these messages had gone on for over a month. She mentioned sneaking around while I was out. My mind flashed to all those nights she claimed to be with girlfriends. Times she'd dressed up and left me behind. My hands trembled, tears stinging my eyes. I felt a physical itch, like my chest was caving in. Without thinking, I texted her from my phone. We need to talk. I know, she responded almost immediately. No, what? I didn't bother answering. She came home an hour later, face pale, eyes flicking anxiously to the watch on the kitchen counter. I stood in the living room, phone in hand. You left your watch behind, I said stiffly. I saw everything. Her shoulders slumped. She began crying. Ivan, let me explain. Explain what? My voice cracked. That you've been sleeping with your ex-husband for weeks. That you lied every time I asked you where you were going. She tried to approach me, but I took a step back, heartbreak turning into hot anger. She sobbed, saying she was sorry. She'd messed up. She wanted to fix this. I demanded to know how many times, how long, if she loved him. She admitted they had reconnected after the concert, met up multiple times. He had a girlfriend, too, she said. The guilt was eating her alive. They fantasized about being together, but never made concrete plans. She insisted she didn't truly love him, that it was just an escape. My emotions swirled. Anger, devastation, humiliation. The night stretched on, the conversation devolving into tears and accusations. She explained she'd been feeling unloved, that I was too wrapped up in my own insecurities, that seeing Martin brought back memories of simpler times when she felt desired. I argued that nothing justified betrayal. She agreed, calling it the worst mistake of her life, swearing she'd break it off. At times, she dropped to her knees, sobbing for my forgiveness. I felt torn between wanting to walk out and wanting to cling to the woman I loved. Ultimately, exhaustion overwhelmed me. I told her we needed a break. I said I'd be filing for divorce. She begged me not to. "Please, Ivan, I'll prove to you I can change. I'll cut all ties with Martin. That's what you said last time about being done with him." I spat, tears in my voice. "You lied to me repeatedly. I can't trust you." But when morning came, my determination faltered. I found her letter on the kitchen table. Pages of heartfelt apologies, promising no more lies, claiming she wanted kids with me now, not with Martin. She wrote about how she realized the gravity of what she'd done. She insisted it was a moment of confusion, curiosity, lust. She wanted to rebuild our marriage, do therapy, anything to prove she could be faithful. Some part of me still loved her deeply. Reading her letter, I felt the old tenderness rise, battling with the heartbreak. That day, I contacted a lawyer about divorce papers. I told Isabelle to expect them. She tearfully refused to sign, said she'd do anything to earn my trust back. I felt stuck, vacillating between rage and love. My brain told me to run. My heart told me I might never love anyone like this again. So when she continued apologizing, cutting off contact with Martin, I watched her block him on her phone. Though I couldn't be sure she didn't use another method, I caved to the part of me that hoped we could salvage this. Chapter 5. Trying to heal in the immediate aftermath, I moved out briefly, renting a small studio downtown. I convinced myself that maybe giving her space would help our marriage in the long run. She said she wanted us to start fresh, but the emotional wounds still bled. Days turned into weeks. We tried couples therapy, an experience that was both cathartic and painful. The therapist, a calm-voiced woman named Der Sandoval, guided us through excruciating conversations about betrayal, forgiveness, and unmet needs. I remember one session vividly. Sandoval asked Isabelle to explain how the affair started, step by step, to help me understand the timeline. Isabelle described seeing Martin at the concert, texting him, meeting up for coffee, feeling drawn to him. She confessed they slept together multiple times, each time rationalizing it as some twisted way to figure out her own dissatisfaction. Hearing the details tore me apart all over again, but the therapist insisted that transparency was crucial for rebuilding trust. When the session ended, I felt hollow. Isabelle tried to hold my hand, but I couldn't meet her eyes. My chest was so tight I could barely breathe. Yet I kept attending therapy, telling myself I owed it to my marriage to give it every chance. Outside of therapy, we'd occasionally meet for dinner. She'd suggest new ways to bond. Weekend trips, adventure sports, even language classes. Part of me appreciated her effort. She was more attentive, showering me with compliments, reminding me I was valuable. She discussed having kids again, painting a rosy future. In fleeting moments, I glimpsed the early days of our romance, that closeness. But then I'd recall the texts, the secrets, the nights she lied about going out with girlfriends, and my stomach would twist in resentment. We continued like this for nearly a year and a half. The emotional roller coaster was grueling. Some weeks, I felt almost normal, believing maybe we'd survive this. I'd wake up next to her, see a gentle smile on her face, and let myself hope. Other weeks, the bitterness returned full force. I'd imagine her in bed with Martin, or remember how she said she wanted kids but not with me. Those words echoed in my mind at the worst times, fueling my doubts. I started having nightmares of walking in on them. Even though we tried to bury the past, it bubbled up in arguments. Small triggers would lead me to lash out, or her to retreat in tears. I wanted to forgive her. I truly did. I still loved her, no matter how much it hurt, but I questioned whether real forgiveness was possible. My trust was shattered. She insisted it was a mistake, but I saw it as multiple betrayals, with planning and repeated intimacy, that felt far from accidental. The fact she had once confessed she wasn't attracted to me anymore, that she wanted kids with someone else. How could I erase that from my memory? Sometimes I wrote in a journal drawer. Sandoval suggested, "Why can't I move on? Why do I feel like this happened yesterday?" Each entry ended the same: "I still love her, but I don't think I can do this." Over time, the exhaustion weighed on both of us. We began to realize that despite therapy and attempts at reconciliation, the fundamental wound wouldn't close. Chapter 6. The divorce decision. As the months turned into more than a year after the affair, our progress stagnated. I went through phases of anger, sadness, numbness, and fleeting hope. Isabelle tried to be patient, but I could sense her frustration that I wouldn't let it go. She'd plead, "It was years ago, Ivan. I'm different now." Or, "Haven't I proven my devotion?" But how does one measure that proof? I still felt second place to Martin, like a default option. Even if she denied it, I couldn't shake that insecurity. One evening, after a heated dispute about her returning late from work, a normal occurrence that triggered my anxiety, she broke down crying. "I can't keep fighting for our marriage alone," she sobbed. "I know I messed up, but I'm trying. You have to meet me halfway." I stared at her tear-streaked face, my own heart aching. "I want to," I said softly, "but something inside me is blocked. I can't get the images out of my head. I keep replaying everything." She sank onto the couch, burying her face in her hands. "I don't know what else to do. We've done therapy. I've shown you my phone records. I gave you access to my social media. I apologized 1,000 times. I'm exhausted." The words hovered in the silence, thick with resignation. That night I slept in the guest room. My thoughts churned until dawn. By morning I'd made up my mind. Maybe we both deserved to find peace, even if that meant apart. So I told her I wanted a divorce. Not just legal separation. The finality of it felt both terrifying and a strange relief. She begged me to reconsider, to give it more time. "It's been over a year," I countered, voice shaky. "If we haven't found resolution by now, I don't think we ever will." Deep down, I wanted to end the cycle of torment. She cried, pleaded, but eventually acquiesced. Thus began the painful process of meeting with lawyers, dividing assets, deciding who gets what. I packed my things and found a small one-bedroom condo near my job. The day I moved out, we both stood in the living room, tearful, as I carried boxes to my car. She whispered, "We still love you, you know." All I could muster was, "He love you too." Before driving off, the divorce went through with minimal legal drama. Despite everything, we tried to remain respectful. By the time the papers were finalized, we were shells of our former selves. Part of me felt guilty for giving up, but another part felt sure it was the right choice. My heart was too damaged to trust her again. Chapter 7. Life after. For 6 months after the divorce, I tried to piece my life back together. I threw myself into my leadership role at work, ironically finding new confidence in my professional abilities. Maybe the personal chaos had forced me to grow a thicker skin. My team recognized my dedication, and I earned praise for guiding them through a challenging project launch. Outside of work, I explored a new city routine. The condo was downtown, within walking distance of restaurants and parks. Weekends became a time for solo pursuits, reading in coffee shops, catching indie films, or sometimes just strolling aimlessly. My married friends invited me to gatherings, but I felt like a fish out of water among couples. A sense of loneliness haunted me, and yet I couldn't ignore how I sometimes missed Isabelle's presence. I'd find myself recalling her laughter, her fiery opinions, the mornings we'd spent sipping coffee and reading newspapers side by side. No matter how deep the betrayal cut, you can't erase years of love overnight. Occasionally, a pang of longing would strike me at random, when I saw a couple riding bikes together or smelled her favorite perfume in a department store. I tried to date, but my heart wasn't in it. Casual conversations felt forced, and I found myself comparing everyone to Isabelle. It wasn't fair to these new people, so I stopped after a few awkward attempts. Gita Sandoval, whom I continued to see individually, suggested I focus on healing and self-reflection. My father said, "Son, just give it time," while my mother lamented that she missed Isabelle. I told her gently that missing someone isn't enough to fix a broken marriage. Chapter 8. Her persistence. About 3 months after our divorce, Isabelle began texting me. At first, just short messages. "How are you holding up?" Or, "Saw something that reminded me of you. Hope you're well." I'd reply politely, keeping my distance. Sometimes she wouldn't respond for weeks. Then a sudden flurry of text again. Around the 5-month mark, she called me. I answered warily, expecting maybe a question about leftover mail or finalizing some divorce detail. Instead, she poured out her heart, telling me how much she missed me, how she regretted everything, how she believed we could start over. "We never had kids," she said, voice trembling. "But we could, with you this time. I want that life with you, if you'll give me a second chance." Her words triggered a storm of emotions. I missed her too, but I'd forced myself to accept we were done. "Isabelle," I sighed. "We tried for 1.5 years after the affair. It didn't work. I don't want to go through that heartbreak again." She insisted she'd grown, that she'd realized losing me was her greatest regret. I messed up, but I can spend the rest of my life making it right." I let her talk, not sure what to say. By the end of the call, I promised to think about it, but I also reminded her we were divorced for a reason. Another month passed. She became more persistent, sending handwritten letters, dropping off coffee at my office. My coworkers gave me curious glances, and I felt awkward explaining the situation. She asked if we could meet in person, and though I hesitated, a part of me wanted to see her. So we arranged a lunch at a quiet bistro downtown. Chapter 9. A lunch reunion. I arrived at the bistro early, anxiety churning in my stomach. She walked in wearing a familiar sky blue blouse, one I'd always loved on her. My heart lurched at how beautiful she looked, how her hair framed her face. We sat across from each other, tension buzzing in the air. Small talk felt impossible, so she dove in. "I'm so sorry," she said, voice thick with emotion. "I know I've said it before, but I want to say it again. I ruined us, and I'll regret it forever." I sipped water, hands trembling slightly. "I appreciate the apology. I managed, but it doesn't change the past." She nodded, eyes downcast. "I know. I keep remembering how we were before everything fell apart. I want that back." Pain pinched my chest. "I want that back too. But it might be gone for good." She reached across the table, gently taking my hand. Do you still love me?" A lump formed in my throat. The truth was complicated. "Yes, I do love you," I admitted quietly. "But I also remember how you said you wanted kids. Just not with me. How you said you weren't attracted to me. How you planned every secret meeting with Martin. It's a lot to carry." Her eyes welled up. We was cruel. I was confused, angry, and I lashed out. "I regret it all. If I could go back." "But we can't," I interjected. "I'm afraid of trying again, only to end up back in that dark place. I don't want to waste more years, for either of us." She wiped her tears with the back of her hand. "You're not a waste. You never were." I was foolish. Could we at least be friends, or see if we can rebuild something with no pressure? My head spun. Friends. Could I watch her date someone else if we failed? Could I handle that heartbreak again? But I couldn't deny a flicker of longing. I missed her laughter, her presence. "I don't know," I said truthfully. "I'm scared." We ended the lunch with a lingering hug, her face buried in my shoulder. "I miss your scent," she whispered. I couldn't respond, my emotions too jumbled. Chapter 10, torn between love and fear. In the weeks following that lunch, Isabelle texted me frequently, inviting me to small get-togethers or suggesting dinner. Sometimes I accepted, drawn by the possibility of closure or curiosity. Each encounter felt both comforting and fraught, like dancing on a thin sheet of ice. She showed me her new life. She was still excelling at work, had gone to therapy on her own, said she recognized destructive patterns from her past. I had to admit, she seemed more self-aware, calmer. In her eyes, I saw genuine remorse. We talked about the old days, laughed over inside jokes, but the elephant in the room was always the affair. She asked, "What would it take for you to trust me again?" I never had a concrete answer. The door to my heart had locked, and the key was nowhere to be found. Meanwhile, my family noticed I was seeing her socially. My mother cautioned me not to rush back into anything. My father, more blunt, said, "Don't forget the pain she caused you. You deserve someone who won't do that." But a piece of me still considered the possibility that maybe we'd grown enough to make it work. If I could only let go of the resentment. Sometimes I'd lie awake, replaying old happy memories, the concert trips, the laughter in the car on road trips, the day we said, "Do," under that canopy of flowers. Then I'd snap back to the day I discovered the messages, or the moment she said she wasn't attracted to me. I felt like I was in a tug of war between my love for who she once was and my fear of being hurt again, because I knew if it happened a second time, it would destroy me completely. Chapter 11, a moment of rekindling. One evening, Isabelle invited me to her apartment. She'd sold the house we shared and moved into a cozy loft. I hesitated but decided to go. When I arrived, she'd cooked dinner, an aromatic spread of roasted vegetables, pasta, and a bottle of wine. The familiarity of her cooking, the warmth of her lit candles, stirred something in me. We chatted about mundane topics, work, old friends, the state of the local sports teams. As we finished eating, the conversation grew personal. She asked about my hopes for the future, if I still dreamed of traveling the world. I asked about her therapy sessions, how she was coping with guilt. We ended up on her couch, talking late into the night. At one point, she whispered, "Can I hold your hand?" I nodded, heart thudding. She slid closer, fingers lacing with mine. I felt a surge of comfort and pain all at once. We leaned our heads together, silent, the weight of unspoken regrets pressing around us. Eventually, she kissed my cheek. I closed my eyes, letting the warmth of her breath wash over me. Did I want to kiss her back? My mind screamed caution, but my heart yearned for the closeness we lost. I turned, brushing my lips against hers. The kiss was tentative, soft, and ended quickly, leaving us both teary-eyed. We pulled apart, breath shaky. "I'm sorry," she murmured, eyes shining with emotion. "No," I said. "It's okay. And I miss this. But—" We both knew the but. The next steps were uncertain. I ended up leaving soon after, confused, longing, but also terrified. That night, I dreamt of our wedding day again, only to wake up in an empty condo. Chapter 1, Reflections on Love and Pain. I visited Sandoval again, explaining the renewed contact. She listened carefully, then asked me pointed questions. What do you truly hope for if you reconnect? What boundaries do you need to feel safe? I struggled to articulate answers beyond vague sentiments. Yes, I wanted her in my life, but I didn't know if I could handle the fear of betrayal. I also confided in Kyle, my old friend who once let me crash on his couch. He shook his head. Look, man, I get it. You love her, but do you trust her? Without trust, how can you have a marriage or even a real partnership? That question haunted me. I tried journaling again, listing pros and cons of reconciliation. Pros, deep love, shared history, potential for a family if we overcame the past. Cons, risk of more heartbreak, the memory of betrayal, the words she once spoke about not wanting kids with me. My list was almost evenly split, leaving me as stuck as ever. A part of me wondered if it was possible to truly forgive and forget, or if that was a myth. Maybe some couples do manage to rebuild after affairs, but I didn't know if I was one of them. My resilience felt thin. Meanwhile, Isabelle continued to reach out, inviting me to picnics, bookstore visits. Like date suggestions, often I accepted. We'd have lovely afternoons, reminiscent of old times, but whenever we got close I'd recoil, memories of Martin creeping in. She sensed my hesitance. Sometimes she'd cry, saying she understood. Other times frustration marred her face, as though she wished I'd just move on already. Chapter 13 true. A crossroads meeting after 6 months of back and forth, Isabelle requested one final talk. A weekend away at a quiet lakeside cabin, she said it could be purely platonic, just a chance to connect and decide once and for all if there was hope for us. My initial response was no. The idea of travelling together felt too intimate. But she persisted, promising separate bedrooms if that made me comfortable. She framed it as a chance to either step forward or find closure. I surprised myself by agreeing. I asked Kyle if I was crazy, and he shrugged. Sometimes closure comes from extraordinary gestures. So, that Friday, we drove 2 hours to a serene lakeside retreat. The cabin was small but cozy, with a view of rippling water and towering pine trees. We spent the first evening cooking a simple dinner, sipping tea on the porch, talking about lighter topics. Childhood memories, random stories from our teenage years. It felt easy, like reacquainting ourselves. Yet an undercurrent of tension remained, a knowledge that we had big decisions to face. The next morning, we took a walk around the lake. The air was crisp, and we paused to watch the sunlight glimmer on the surface. Isabelle finally broke the silence. "Ivan, I brought you here because I need to know if you can see a future with me again. If not, I'll respect that. But I need closure too." I stared at the water, heart pounding. "We wish I had a simple answer," I said, voice raw. "Part of me wants to say yes, because I still love you. Another part can't forget the pain. I'm torn." She looked down. "I get it. I can't undo what I did. I can only show you now who I am." We sat on a fallen log. She reached for my hand, and this time I let her hold it. "I dream about starting a family with you," she whispered, tears welling. "I know I once said I didn't want kids with you, but that was me being cruel. The truth is, I see you as a father to our future children. I imagine teaching them about the world together, travelling as a family." My throat tightened. "That dream is beautiful. But reality, you cheated, Isabelle. You made me feel second place. I'm terrified of feeling that again." She nodded, tears sliding down her cheek. "I deserve your distrust. I just want to prove I'd never do that again." We walked back to the cabin in heavy silence, each lost in thought. That evening, she cooked my favourite meal, spaghetti carbonara. We played a board game by the fireplace, sipping wine, occasionally sharing a laugh. For a few hours, it felt almost like a normal, happy couples getaway. But the looming decision weighed on me. On our final day, we sat on the porch, watching the sunrise. She turned to me, eyes resolute. "I love you. I want to try again. If you can't, then I'll let you go." My chest ached. "I'm sorry," I murmured, tears brimming. I don't know if I can. Every time I think about letting my guard down, I remember how it felt to discover your lies." Her face crumpled. She nodded, lips trembling. We drove home in near silence, a tension so thick it was suffocating. Chapter and Forchery, final letting go. Back in my condo, I sat for hours, replaying the cabin weekend in my head. I tried to visualize a scenario where I overcame the betrayal, fully trusting her again, building a family. I also imagined the alternative, staying single, eventually finding someone new, or just living alone, but free from the shadow of that wound. Days passed. She texted, asking if I'd decided. My stomach churned every time her name appeared on my screen. Finally, I typed a long reply that I loved her, but I couldn't see myself living with that fear forever. I was too deeply hurt, and no matter how much I wanted to, I couldn't convince my heart to fully forgive. I ended by saying I was done trying, for both our sakes. We'd already wasted so much time in limbo. She responded with heartbreak, but also acceptance. "I understand. Thank you for telling me." That was it. A short, painful end to a prolonged dance we'd been trapped in. I cried that night, alone in my living room. The finality of it was brutal. Even though we'd been divorced for 6 months, that was the moment I truly felt we parted ways. I felt hollow, yet somewhat relieved. The war inside me settled. Sometimes love isn't enough to salvage a shattered foundation. Chapter 50, Epilogue. It's been another 6 months since that final goodbye, a full year after the divorce was legally granted. Isabelle and I no longer speak regularly. Occasionally, I see her social media updates, a new project at work, pictures of her traveling with friends. She looks happy, and I'm glad for her, though a pang still hits my heart. I hope she truly has grown and won't repeat the same mistakes in her next relationship. As for me, I've continued therapy with Dre Sandoval, focusing on rebuilding my self-esteem, embracing my professional growth, and learning from the past. I can't say I'm fully over it. Heartbreak doesn't vanish neatly. But I'm in a better place, more at peace with the decision to let go. Sometimes I wonder if we could have done more. If I'd been less insecure, if she'd been more honest, if we'd sought therapy earlier. But hindsight only fuels regret, and regret traps you. I choose to believe we did the best we could under the circumstances. Our love was real, but it wasn't invincible. Friends ask if I'll date again, or if I'm still too scarred. I tell them I'm open to the possibility of meeting someone new. I feel more cautious but also more self-aware. There's a faint hope flickering in me that one day I might connect with someone who won't betray me, who'll help me build a stable, trusting relationship. Until then, I'm content focusing on my personal journey, cherishing my independence, and healing day by day. I still love Isabelle in some way. Love isn't an emotion you switch off like a light, but I've learned that sometimes love can't outweigh betrayal, and that's okay. I found the strength to walk away from a dynamic that caused relentless pain. Perhaps that itself is a form of love for myself, for my own well-being. And so my story closes on a note of acceptance. I don't hate her. I don't hate myself. I understand that relationships can become irreparable even when love remains. My next chapter is unwritten, wide open, brimming with potential. I turn the page, carrying the lessons of heartbreak with me, hoping they guide me to a healthier kind of love. One where trust is unbroken and my heart, finally, can rest easy.